This is an extract from the Leader Coronavirus Daily podcast by the Evening Standard and hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for it on your podcast provider.
In the minutes after 10 p.m, London's streets fill with crowds of people who have just been kicked out of the capital's busy pubs, bars and restaurants. The nationwide curfew was brought in last month to help tackle a second wave of coronavirus. But some are worried that as everyone heads home at the same time, the risk of spread is at least just as bad as before, and the impact on the hospitality industry could add to the devastating losses they've already seen. Our consumer business editor, Jonathan Prynn, joins me now. Jonathan, why is the Tory leader of Westminster Council ordering an investigation into the effect of the curfew?
I think there's widespread concern about the scenes that we've witnessed in the West End in particular over the last couple of sort of Friday, Saturday nights going into early hours Sunday morning, of the impact that the 10 o'clock curfew has on crowding on the streets of London or central London, where people, tens of thousands of diners and drinkers are being ejected from premises at exactly the same moment. And inevitably, then you get this huge convergence effect where people are being forced into very close proximity to each other, which totally goes against, the sort of safety and health first motivation of the curfew in the first place.
So what are the alternatives then?
Yeah, I think the industry wants a much more staggered system. The licensing authorities do try and have premises with staggered closing times. So you get, pubs at 11, bars at 12, nightclubs at 2 or whatever. So you precisely for this reason that you don't get a massive exodus of people coming out of premises at exactly the same moment, which, is not ideal for transport home. It's not ideal for lots of potentially quite sort of intoxicated people all gathering together at the same moment, and it's certainly not good when that happens in the middle of a highly infectious viral pandemic.
Rishi Sunak has come out today defending the curfew, saying that the alternative was that they shut altogether. Is that still an option?
Well, I guess it has to be. I'm sure they will keep that as an absolute total last possible option, worst case scenario, and their message is very much, we need to take these steps, unpalatable though they are now, in order to prevent something worse coming down the line. But the industry has two main complaints. One is that it just makes their operation totally unviable. They're operating at a loss because capacity is so restricted. Nightclubs in particular usually don't open till 10, 11 o'clock anyway, so they're completely they're losing almost all their custom. Bars as well, particularly in the West End, not quite so bad for restaurants maybe, but nevertheless restaurants are finding it really hard to get people out the door by 10 o'clock. It means having to get bills to tables by 9:30. It means you can't really have two sittings of an evening, which reduces their profitability. So there's that point, but there's also the point about this sort of huge overcrowding happening on streets and on public transport at precisely 1 minute past 10, when everyone's just been thrown out of the doors of thousands of restaurants, bars, etc., etc.
The PM is facing a Tory rebellion over the measure. What is it about the curfew that has some MPs so concerned?
Well, hospitality is a huge sector, employs several million people. It's one of the biggest contributors to national GDP, and it's one of the sectors that has had the toughest pandemic in a way. Obviously, during lockdown, none of these premises could open. They thought they were just about getting back to the road to some form of viability over the summer when they reopened in July. Remember, it's only July the 4th that the hospitality sector's been able to reopen. It isn't that long ago. And now just when some sort of commercial viability seemed back in reach, they feel it's been snatched away from them by the curfew, which just makes it impossible for them to make the money, pay the bills, pay the rents, pay the wages, and make some sort of profit for themselves. They just cannot do it.
And as Westminster Council goes out to look at the effects of the curfew, what kind of impact could their findings have?
Well, I think if they, I think MPs are getting a huge amount of pressure from their constituents already on this issue. I think there's a big post bag. The industry is putting a lot of pressure on. I think it's another powerful voice if they particularly if they do come up with some compelling evidence that people are gathering in a dangerous way on top of the sort of anecdotal evidence that we've seen already. I think that would put a lot of pressure on the government, particularly as they've been very reluctant to reveal the scientific case for the 10 o'clock curfew, other than to say we need to stop people mixing in a dangerous way as a kind of assertion, rather than saying, right, well, we've got a really cast iron piece of scientific evidence that proves that drinking after 10 o'clock is dangerous.
Search for the Leader Coronavirus Daily on any podcast provider to hear more from the podcast.